that we would be reminded of the great work that you have done, that we would be motivated to point others towards you, and we would be committed to the discipline and guidance of your Spirit as we live each day for your glory and your honor. Amen. As I've been going through my ministry at Lifezone, where I pastor, you go through a number of books. We spent a couple of years going through Proverbs. I spent 3 years going through Ecclesiastes, and that was quite a ride. And then New Testament as well. We've done, 1 John and 2 John and whatnot, and Thessalonians. Currently, I'm taking a portion of the church that's in our small groups through the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is absolutely phenomenal. The author is unknown to us. There's a number of guesses on that, but he remains a mystery. Yet it's certainly someone who was a scholar. If you haven't spent time in Hebrews, I recommend you to go and study it nice and slowly with a good study Bible, because the cross references are just full. Hebrews has been called the key of the Old Testament. And as you go through it, and then you go back to the Old Testament, you see segments that are about Christ that otherwise could just blend into the other stories. However, so I wanted to today talk about a section from Hebrews, but before we get there, I want to set the stage, as it were, or remind us of our standing, remind us where we as humanity find ourselves. Long ago, God made the world. There was nothing, and then there was everything. He spun the planets and stars into where they should go, and he formed the seas and the mountains, and he filled them with life, diverse and interesting and distinct life. And he took a pause and he started to make man. He crafts man out of the dirt, and he breathes a soul into him, making him unique, making him distinct from all creation. Man then is there, Adam, and all of life is brought to him, and he looks at it and he names it, but none of them are suitable for his help. And so God puts him to sleep, and he makes Eve to be his wife. And it briefly describes this stage of humanity that I often refer to as the intended nature, where man and women are in the garden, and they're with God, and they're in perfection. There's no death, there's no struggle, there's no pain, there's no fear, there's no even really thorns, and they can just eat and live and do the jobs that God has given them. And it tells us that God would come and walk with them in the cool of the day, and they have this beautiful relationship with God. We don't know how long. Was it 1,000 years? Was it a week? We don't get that picture, but we have this picture of Adam and Eve living in perfection with God. And then there's this segment of time, this event that takes place that we refer to as the fall, where the devil creeps into the garden in the form of a snake, and he comes to Eve and he presents the same lie he's been spinning over and over and over. Did God really say this? No, God doesn't actually mean that. He means this. And he tricks her, but she willingly takes part, and she eats of the one fruit that they weren't supposed to. And it's not that fruit, whatever it was, had some magical component to it. It's that they went in disobedience to God. And so sin enters into the world. Adam eats of it as well, and God comes. And it's interesting because it had told us that they walked with God in the cool of the day. They had this perfect relationship. And yet they hear the footsteps of God. And instead of anticipation, instead of excitement and delight, it turned to fear and shame, and the sense of we need to hide. And so they go and they hide, and he comes, and obviously it's God. He knows where they are. And he has this conversation with them of, you've done what is wrong, and now there's going to be repercussions because of that. You are going to have to work the soil. Thorns and thistles will come out about you. You'll earn your food by the sweat of your brow. Women will give birth in pain, and death will come upon you. But in that, he does two things that are of great interest to me. The first is he says to Eve, but the serpent will grab your heel, but one of your offspring will crush his head, which is right there at the start of man living with sin, living in a cursed environment. God says there's a hope that's coming. There's one who's coming who will bring deliverance. So from the very start of sin, we see Jesus. We see his redemptive nature coming out. And then God does something. He goes and he kills some animals, and he brings the pelts out and gives them to Adam and Eve as clothing to cover their shame, to cover their nakedness. They were trying to cover themselves with leaves, and it wasn't working. God looked for them, and he made a way. From that point on, we have the rest of the history of man. And over throughout the story of man, which we find in the Old Testament, we have this repeat event of man not listening to God and reaping the repercussions of their disobedience. Cain and Abel. Abel brings an offering that is acceptable. Cain brings one that is not. And he gets angry, and God comes and has this conversation with him. And it's wild because it's such a logical conversation. It makes such sense, but it shows the depravity of sin and how it can grip us and change us. He says to him, if you do what is right, will you not be regarded as right? And if you do what is wrong, sin is crouching, it's waiting for you. Its desire is to rule you, to consume you, but you must rule over it. And he doesn't. He kills his brother. He doesn't listen to God. And so he has to live with sin. We can fast forward only a number of years, and we have the state of the world in such disarray that when God looks at it, he says, I'm going to kill them all. I'm going to wipe them all out. Their sin has so far gone. There's only Noah. There's only this one man who's righteous. And so I'm going to take him and his family, and I'm going to restart it all. And then they're told to disperse, and they decide to build a tower and unify instead. And once again, they're in disobedience. We can fast forward to their time in Egypt when they're in the wilderness as Moses is leading them. And the man Korah decides that he should be the ruler. Who put Moses in charge? I don't want him there. And he goes and he thinks he can rebel against the authority that God has put in place. The story goes, Moses says, let God judge between us, and the earth opens up and swallows Korah and everyone with him, and it closes over. You can look into the judges and these people that we can sometimes idolize. You look at Samson and his marvelous strength and just his wild stupidity, his wild desires to just give in to his own nature and do what was right in his own sight. He dishonors his parents. He doesn't listen. In his dying moments, I don't know if you've ever caught this detail, but in his dying moments, he's praying to God, and he's there. His eyes are out. He's between the two pillars, surrounded by the Philistine rulers. And he says to God, Lord, would you give me my strength one more time, that I may destroy the Philistines so that I can have vengeance for my eyes. Not even that they are your enemies or they've mocked your strength, but even in that final moment, this self-centered nature that he wants personal vengeance on them is baffling. We can look at someone who's a phenomenal leader like King David, and we can read through the Psalms and see this marvelous poetry that speaks of the greatness of God, and we can look at it and say, what a man after the heart of God. And then we read of Bathsheba and how he looked and he thought and he gave in, and then he assassinated, and he just, what a horribly miserable thing to do. Not listening to the will of God. Over and over, there's this repeat story of man choosing to do what is wrong, but then God calling them out of that. Of God coming and making a way, calling them out of their error and into repentance. And throughout history, God has used leaders, kings, prophets, and judges to teach his people his ways. The prophets, they spoke of one who was to come. We refer to him as the Messiah. He would bring salvation. He would pay for the sins of the world and make it possible for man to be reconciled to God. The prophecies made about this Messiah figure, they weren't broad, generic figures like he will be a man, or he'll have brown eyes, but more hyper specific things of where he would come from, who he would come from, what would happen around his generation at that time, the life that he would live and how he wouldn't break any bones, and just beyond, over and over, these really specific things about his birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, making a way that we could be reconciled to God. And many years later, Christ was born. Christ lived an incredible life. He healed people, he performed miracles, he taught with such authority and such uniqueness that the thousands of people would gather around him, to the point where you couldn't get into the building that he was in. He went off to the countryside, and the multitudes would follow him, not having food for the day, not being well prepared, but they knew that Christ was there, and so they went. And then many years later, in his ministry, Christ died. He was killed by the Jewish leaders via the Roman legal system. But as you and I know, he did not stay dead. One of the most investigated pieces of human history, Christ rose from the grave. And for the next 40 days, he appeared to several hundred people, and then he ascended into heaven. And we have this great hope, as the angel said to the men who were there when he ascended, "What are you looking for? He will return just as he left." And from that moment, the church was born. The disciples spent the rest of their lives spreading the gospel, establishing the church. And even though it brought incredible hardship on them, all but one of them died as martyrs for the faith, whether it was put on a cross or boiled or executed or whatever. They died for their faith. And the church has carried on to this very day, where you and I are gathered here today in the name of Christ to glorify him and to declare his word and his greatness. The problem that Adam and Eve faced, that Cain faced, that Balaam faced, that Korah, Jephthah, Samson, Saul, and many others face, you and I face. We face the same problem. That it can be summarized in that we fall short of the glory of God. As Romans puts it, none are righteous, no, not one. And this isn't a common thought. There's many in the world today who have this idea that we are generally good people. That, my faith in humanity is restored. That sure, there's a couple bad apples, and we can look at Genghis Khan, and we can look at Hitler, and we can look at Mao, and we can look at these grand figures of history. And sure, those are like wickedly evil people, but the average Joe is a good man. This is not reality. We all fall short of the glory of God. How simple is it? Well, God, with his revelation of morality, he slowly throughout time let us see what is right and what is wrong more and more and more. It started in the garden, right? You can eat of any of these trees, just not this one, which is just simply an act of obey me, listen to me, do what I'm asking of me, and disobey. And then as time went on, he says to Cain, evil is crouching for you. You want to kill your brother, but you can't do that. That's not right. And then he went and did it anyways. The big revelation mountain, the mountain that Moses ascends up the mountain, he meets with God. And there's clouds and there's thunder and there's this grand event. He comes down the mountain with these tablets, and on them are the 10 Commandments. And from this, we have the moral law expanded. And so, you can look at that, and you shall have no other gods before me. No idols, no carved images, and nothing you worship in that way. The Lord's name, we're not to take it in vain. We're not to represent him falsely. That we should keep the Sabbath, that we should honor the Sabbath and not just do away with it. that we should honor our mother and father, we should not murder, we should not commit adultery, no stealing, don't bear a false witness, and don't covet. And so here's the 10 commandments. And the wild thing is to think, if you have the conversation with yourself, with your spouse, with your children, with anyone on the street, and you go through these 10 commandments, have they been kept? I've fallen short. Just simply to say, honor your mother and father. Don't bear a false witness. To covet what someone else has had. A radio ad that I bring up probably way too often, but there's a RV store near where we live, and they had this radio ad that ran for years. I guess back when I used to listen to the radio, and it was this, oh, are you tired of keeping up with the Joneses? Like, the phrase there, keeping up with the Joneses. Be the trendsetter on your block. Come and buy an RV, and it's just we've marketed covetousness. We've marketed jealousy to a point where it's just, that's normal. Your neighbor gets a new car, and all of a sudden your car's feeling a little slow, right? Your buddy across the way gets new windows installed, and suddenly you start to feel a draft. And it's just like the idea of being content is not a reality in this world. But to take the point a little bit further, because sure, people can look at that and they can say, oh, well, sure, when I was a kid, I would talk back to my parents every now and then I would meet the repercussions of that. But everyone did. Jesus takes it a point further, and he tells us that it's an issue of the heart. So Jesus, in his teachings, he said, you've heard it said that you should not kill. But I say to you that if you are angry towards your brother, you've committed murder against him in your heart. You've heard it said that you should not commit adultery. But I'll say to you that even if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. And so he opens the law up to the point where it's just like, oh, I've failed drastically. I failed over and over, and as have you. We have all fallen short. Romans just spells it out. All have fallen short of the glory of God. None are righteous, no, not one. We look at Eve so often and we think, if you would not have bitten the apple, but you and I have bitten it a million times. We've gone against the will of God over and over and over. And so we have sin. Sin which leads to death. It separates us from God because he is righteous. He is pure and he is holy. And so us in our tainted state, in our sinful state, are unable to approach the bench. We're unable to come in. What does it look like? It looks like this picture. Jesus teaches a story where he talks about this great wedding feast, and all these invites went out and no one paid attention to them. And so he said to his servants, go out to the masses and grab the people out on the street and invite them, you and I. And then they came in, and as he's going around, he sees one guy who's not dressed properly for it. And he says, what are you doing in here? You haven't prepared yourself. And they kick him out. There's this understanding that there's a standard to which we so often fall short. You cannot just come in to the court of God. Isaiah, in his image of God, in this vision of God, says, woe is me. He breaks down in utter despair. Woe is me, for I am an unclean man with unclean lips, and I come from an unclean people. And it was that he saw himself, but he saw himself in the throne room of God. And it was this picture of, I am about to be destroyed because I cannot continue here in my state. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God killed an animal to cover their nakedness, to cover their shame. The priests of Israel, they had these instructions. You can go through the book of Leviticus. You can read these instructions over and over, that on the Day of Atonement, the head priest, he would take a bull and he would offer it as a sacrifice to cover himself. And then the people would bring in their animals. And the animals would die for the sins of man. And whether it was pigeons or bulls or goats or lambs or rams, these creatures would die for the sins of man. And it would show to the people the repercussion of their sin. In our modern age, we are drastically removed from that. Now we're out in the sticks, so some of you probably have had to process animals before, or watched a deer from a tree stand, or something like that. And there's this understanding when you watch a creature that isn't a Japanese beetle, but it is something that appears to have more life within it. And you watch that life fade. You watch it die. There's a seriousness that comes over the heart of, what have I done? There's a solemn respect. And to think of having to bring some animal to the priest and watch its life be taken because of what I have done. It just points to the severity of sin. Sin results in death. And this is inescapable. Inescapable. And so it was that Jesus came and dies as the sacrifice for mankind. You might have heard that before. We talk about that a lot. So we're going to expound on what that means. In Hebrews chapter 2, verses 10 to 17, talking about Christ and the sacrifice he made, it says, "For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since therefore the children share in the flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subjects to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. It opens up with this statement of reminding us of the divinity of Christ, that he made everything, that everything was made through him. And it's echoing the opening of John, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Nothing has come into existence except what has come through him. And he talks about this idea of the perfection of through suffering, which is a really weird idea. If you think about it, we have Jesus Christ, God, and it's saying that he was perfected through suffering. I don't know if you've ever reflected on that phrase. I have 4 children, and sometimes we will go for walks in the woods. And, especially in the fall, I'll take them hunting and stuff. But I can remember a time, or I could paint this picture for you so that it's not me, it's just some father. And let's assume that this father is a good man by our standards. He's a good father, and he wants to take his son for a hike. And so, his son's just this little tyke with short little legs. But if you're taking a boy on a hike, he needs a backpack. And so you find a backpack in the house and you put some stuff in it. Although you're only going for like an hour or two, you need to put a lot of stuff in the backpack because he's a little boy. So he wants his binoculars, and he might want an axe, and he might want this and that. And you start to put stuff into his pack. And then on your own pack, you got some food, you got some water, you got all that stuff. And you set out for your walk. Now you're out with the boy, and so it's not a severe walk, it's not a heavy walk, but as you're going, your son starts to slow down. And he starts, kicking his feet a little bit, and you can tell he's getting tired. And so you give him some snacks, you give him some water, And he seems a little bit chipper, and that lasts about 5 minutes, and then he slows down even more. And he says, "Oh, Dad, I'm so tired. My bag is so heavy." And you think to yourself, yes, because everything in there is not required. But you're a good dad. And so you are like, "Well, son, I'll take your pack." And so although you yourself are strained, you take his backpack and somehow you either clip it onto yours or you put it around his shoulder. And now you have your pack and you have his pack and you continue to walk. And as you know, he's still tired. And he still complains. It's a little bit of time goes on and it's like, "Oh, Dad, how much longer? I'm so tired." And you're thinking, we're on a loop and we're only halfway. We're in trouble. And what ends up happening, if you're the good father, is you're doing a hike with 2 backpacks and a child on your shoulders. And you come back to the car and you're suffering and you're sweating. The flies are biting, you're sweaty, you're tired, and the steps feel long. Maybe you stumbled on some roots. You have to be extra cautious because you have precious cargo. And you started the hike as a good father, but you finished it as a better one because you were willing to suffer for the sake of the one that you love. And Christ, although he is marvelous and flawless and is God eternal, accomplished something through suffering. And so we can picture this. You can picture Jesus, and we always put this purple sash on him. And maybe you can go back to your Beaver Scouts or Boy Scouts or BG Splat or whatever it was, and where you would have this sash, and you can picture Christ with his sash on, and it's the creator of all things. He has that badge. God eternal, he has that badge. The life giver, and we can use all these marvelous phrases, and they're really good. But then he gets out the needle and he's able to sew on there Redeemer, salvation, the one who paid it all, the Lamb without blemish, the suffering on the cross, going through death. He has accomplished something that somehow takes perfection and moves it up a mark. Just hard to understand, but it's the reality. And it's because of that work that the text tells us he is not ashamed to call us his brothers. He's not ashamed to call us his brothers. He has paid a great price. He has accomplished a great work. Our salvation is something that Christ, rightfully so, is proud of. And when you and I stand in the throne room of heaven on the day of judgment, and our lives are put on display, and I think of my life, and I think of that moment, and I know I'm redeemed by the blood, but I am horrified at the things that are going to be put up there, that I'm going to have to give an account. But what a wondrous thing that without shame, without regret, without any of that, Christ will stand and say, "This one is mine. This one is my brother. I will tell of you in the court of heaven." What a marvelous thing. It tells us that he conquered death, and so we don't need to be slaves to it anymore. You know, there's a lot of folks who share in a lot of common fears. Spiders and snakes is a pretty big fear. Maybe some of you here are a little squirmy around those creatures, even though we're in Nova Scotia where no snake and no spider can harm you. It does not stop my wife from screaming when there's a spider, or Lily from coming and getting me in the middle of the night because there's a spider in the corner of her room and I have to go down and kill that. But we have that fear. Public speaking is one of the most common fears that there is. People, if you think of coming up here and doing something like this, it's nerve-wracking for some. But the fear of death is one that holds many, which is interesting because you can avoid spiders. You can move away from them. You could live a life where you never have to approach a mic. And yet death will come for us all. And so there's the fear of it. There's the fear of going through it, and there's the fear of what will come. But through the work of Christ, we're no longer slaves to that fear. To think, like, I have a friend named Gladys, whom some of you actually might have met at one point, but you will meet her in glory. She passed away a number of years ago, very young, and just a complication from a surgery. And I did her funeral. I've done a number of funerals, as you do in my trade. And it was a weird feeling because I've done funerals for people where you're not sure. Where are they? Where do they stand with God? And to be able to stand with authority and to be able to stand with full assurance and say that my sister Gladness is in the presence of God. In a way, I'm jealous of her. I have to continue on here for whatever time God has given me, but she is in glory. And this isn't unique to me. Paul himself says that his desire is to go be with Christ, but that it's better for him for the sake of the church to stay. And it's not this thought of suicidal nature. It's just understanding that how marvelous and glorious that will be, that that's my desire to go there. And so there's no longer this fear of death or this fear of what is to come, but rather, to some degree, a sense of anticipation. An understanding that although there's beauty here, and there's things to enjoy here, and there's work to be done here, this is the lobby. This is like the opening credits. This is just the beginning. And where we are going is so much grander. How much grander is it? When we get the description of heaven, we don't get a lot. One of the pieces that it describes to us, it talks about the roads being paved with gold. And so many people misunderstand this, or they don't get the nuance that's hidden here. Jesus with his disciples, there's an act before his arrest where he washes their feet. This was something that the lowest slave, the lowest servant was supposed to do, because you walked on the streets with livestock and with dirt, with sandals. And so you got the dirt and you got the manure, you got the sweat, you got all that stuff on your feet. The streets were extraordinarily dirty. And then you contrast that with, well, what is the most precious thing you could think of? Well, you might think of myrrh, you might think of frankincense, you might be like, oh, rubies are pretty. It's gold. Gold's up there. Gold and diamonds, those are our top two. And even in this time period, gold was of extreme value. And so understand this picture of heaven, that what is the dirtiest here is what is the most valuable here, being gold, is what is the road there. Gold will be used as gravel. That's the idea. And so it expands to this understanding that everything here that we think is so grand, it's peanuts there. It's dirt. It's that much greater. And so we don't need this fear. But the question can come, and maybe you experience this, or hopefully as you have conversations with people and you point them to Christ, this question can come up. How could the death of one man cover the sins of the rest? It's a question that makes sense, because it wasn't just one man. It's Jesus Christ. It's God eternal. It's the creator of all, the Lord of the universe, and his worth as an individual, the worth of Christ, is more than you and I and everyone else in the entire cosmos. To the degree that rocks would develop a voice and scream out in worship to him. Mountains will bow down. The sea will stop its roaring. Nature itself listens to him. The stars are in orbit because he told them to be there. He is the creator of all, and he lived in perfection. He is worthy, worthy, worthy. He is perfect. He is innocence. He is the very definition of glory and honor, and yet he lowers himself. He takes on manhood, and he comes down and walks among us. As the text puts it, he is the Lamb without blemish. He is absolute perfection. And because of his glory, because of his stature and his status, it is from that his sacrifice covers all of us. His greatness is the exact opposite of our sinful state, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. As I said, the high priest on the Day of Atonement, the first event was him sacrificing a bull to cover his own sins. And Jesus sacrificed himself that he might cover the sins of man. But then to make propitiation, this fancy word for not just the covering of sin, but appeasing the judgment and wrath of God. And we don't like that word wrath, but we need to understand that we deserve the wrath of God. And at the same time, he is slow to anger. And once again, because apologetics, which is the defense of the faith, is such a passion of mine, I'll point on this. As you have conversations with people, they'll say, well, how is it that God is freeing us from his own judgment? Because he's just, and justice has to happen, but he's slow to anger. The picture I use quite often is this idea of a father who says to his children, your room is a mess. Your room is an absolute disaster. I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to have a cup of coffee. And I need you to clean your room while I do that. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to judge you. And he's the dad. He's just to do so. And he goes upstairs and he makes his coffee, and he doesn't use the instant thing. He decides to slow it down, and he grinds some beans and he brews it and he makes it nice and hot. And then he sits there and he waits for it to cool down, and he sips at it. It's getting warmer, but he decides to take it slowly. And then he drinks it and he goes, well, I'm done my coffee. It's time to go judge. Maybe I'll have another cup. He's slow to anger in hopes that it'll get turned around. Now, the problem with that image is that the child is alone cleaning. In reality, what he does is he goes and he puts the kettle on, and then he comes back down and he says, you need to do this. You need to clean that up. Here, let me grab the vacuum for me. Let me grab a bag for you. Oh, here, this is how you fold that. And he shows us how to be clean. And he makes a way for it to be clean. He's slow to anger. God is just, and we need him to be just. And when you have conversations with your neighbors and your colleagues and your friends and your family and who are against God, you can see two things happen. They'll say, well, God is bringing justice, and that's wicked. Who is he to judge? Why would he do that? Why would he bring judgment and damn us and all that stuff? But then at the same time, they say, there's this great evil out there, and God didn't do anything about it. You can't win because they're mad at God. But it's either they want justice or they want liberation. All will stand before God. But he has made a way. You have sinned, and I have sinned. And sin is a horrible, horrible thing. It curses the world. If you think of all the pain, all the suffering that we go through, whether it's lost loved ones, scars, disease and sickness. You think of those people that we mentioned who are in the seniors' home, and their joints are getting sore and days are getting harder and the energy's running out. It's a result of sin. You think of the great wars that have happened and that are currently happening. It's a result of sin. You hear of trauma and problems and people who have been abused, people who have been neglected, people who have faced, assault, or have been stolen from or taken advantage of or killed as a result of sin. You think of your own desire and the struggle that you face personally with sin. And like Paul says, I know what is right and I want to do it, but I do what is wrong, even though I don't want to do it. Who can save me? Wretched man that I am. Glory be to Christ. It's a result of sin, the fact that I know what is right and I know that what is wrong I shouldn't do, but something pulls me towards it. It's a result of sin. Sin is not a small thing. And ultimately, it separates us from God. It eternally separates us from God. And yet it is through Christ alone that we can be freed from the result of sin, that we can stand counted as sons and daughters before God. Think of this. Think of yourself and everything that you've done. And then to have this phrase, counted as righteous. It doesn't make sense. It's the greatest thing that has ever and will ever and could ever happen. It's greater than creation. It's greater than the Red Sea being split. It's greater than the plagues falling on Egypt. It's greater than Christ healing blind eyes and walking on water and all these miraculous things that we see. It's greater than all of that. The fact that I and you can stand before God counted as righteous. And so we are left with a question that you and I likely have answered, is will we accept God's grace, his mercy, and his sacrificial work? Will we accept it? Do we see our sin? Do we see our wrongdoing? And then to turn in repentance. And the beautiful thing is, although we can be overwhelmed by shame, although we can feel that we've gone too far astray, though our sin is great, his grace is greater. What a truth to hold on to. He's faithful to forgive. The most pivotal moment in human history is also the most pivotal moment in my life and in your life. Christ crucified. And from that moment, we have the opportunity, and what a wonderful thing to be reminded of, that we are redeemed, that we are rescued, that we are free. And from that then to go forward and to be loyal to God, to understand that his ways are best and to follow him. This is elementary. This is a really simple foundational message. But what a thing to be reminded of, something that we should remind ourselves of often so that it never becomes casual. That when you think of Christ crucified, it's not a mundane thing, but it is the most glorious moment that has ever been and ever could be. That it is the thing that is the height of your gratitude and the height of your identity. And from that, day after day, we draw closer to God. We glorify him in all that we do. We follow him. Beautiful, beautiful thing. Dear Lord, I thank you this day that you have made a way. Lord, I think of my sin. I think of my shame, my wrongdoing. And I am beyond grateful that you have made a way, that has been cleaned from my heart. Lord, that you have made us new creations. Lord, I ask that we would listen to your Holy Spirit as it convicts us, that you would draw us closer and closer to righteousness, that we would pursue wisdom in all things. Lord, give us opportunities to point others towards you, that they might have the same freedom through Christ that we have received. We love you, Lord, for you are good. Amen. Amen.